The Ukrainian defense forces have cleared several settlements in the Donetsk region of Russian occupiers, specifically Hrusk, Rubizn, Novovodyan, Petrovka, Vasil, and Zoloty Kolodets. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Units of the Armed Forces and the National Guard of Ukraine, which are part of the Azov First Corps, took part in the operation. As a result of the fighting, the enemy suffered significant losses. About 1,000 occupiers were eliminated and around 400 were wounded. About 50 surrendered and were taken prisoner. During the operation, 11 Russian occupier tanks, 8 armored fighting vehicles, and more than 100 units of automotive and motor equipment were also destroyed. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, stabilization operations are ongoing near Dobrapilya. And the day before, forces from the 7th Air Assault Corps and adjacent units cleared the city of Pokrovsk of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups.
There were 3 groups, sabotage groups, but these aren't really sabotage groups anymore. They're small assault units, 3 groups of 50, so a total of 150 people. They were completely cleared out. They say that many surrendered because apparently the Russian servicemen realized this was a one-way road. So, they entered Pokrovsk, right, some of them hid in basements, maybe tried to put up some resistance, but for the most part, as I understand it, they surrendered without a fight. Those who didn't want to surrender were simply eliminated.
In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russian army is using the so-called thousand cuts tactic. According to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, about 50 assaults are recorded there every day. Russian forces are trying to encircle the Pokrovsk agglomeration from both sides, forming a kind of pincer movement. But in the Sumy region, the aggressors suffered a defeat.
Despite the fact that a truly powerful group was concentrated there, made up of the best Russian airborne units, Marines, and the top motorized rifle units of the ground forces, the enemy has had no success over the past 2 months. On the contrary, they lost several settlements, and their latest attempt to advance in the area of Stepne and Novokostyantyniv ended in complete failure. The occupiers were destroyed and pushed back beyond the state border. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General, in an interview with RBC Ukraine.
Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the Russian army attacked the positions of Ukrainian defenders near the settlements of Dub, Karpivka, Mern, and Yampol. On the Pokrovsk section of the front, the invaders tried to push the defense forces' soldiers from their positions near Fedorivka, Mayak, Chervony Lyman, Proman, Kotlin, and Novokrenka. And on the Pavlivka front, fighting took place near Khrushchevsk, Filia, Volnpol, and toward Kamishivka.
We can see the kind of semi-encirclement Pokrovsk is in, and this whole agglomeration together with Vinohrad, and here, intense fighting continues. But in Zaporizhia, since 4 regions are included in the so-called illegal changes to their constitution, up to 30,000 troops have been redeployed there over the past week. They were pulled from Sumy region and several others. Half of them are to strengthen their offensive capabilities and potential. Again, that's for Pokrovsk, and the other half are for Zaporizhia.
On one of the key fronts, operators from the 429th Separate Achilles Unmanned Systems Regiment used FPV drones to immobilize and destroy a Russian T-90M Proryev tank. This is the most modern and expensive tank in the enemy's armed forces. The cost of a single unit is over $4.5 million. In addition, with precise strikes, the pilots disabled another tank hidden in a forest belt, a Grad multiple rocket launcher system, a Tiger armored combat vehicle, and a Kamaz truck. The effective fight of Ukrainian defenders against Russian drones was demonstrated by the assault battalion of the 225th Separate Assault Regiment Black Swan. With 10 drops, which cost Ukraine about $100, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed 8 enemy drones worth $6,000. Thus, the cost ratio for each destroyed drone is about 1 to 60 in Ukraine's favor. Meanwhile, in the Torets direction, Russian forces are moving away from attempts to attack with armored vehicles and are using a new assault tactic, employing so-called invisibility cloaks. So, in footage filmed by Ukrainian soldiers, you can see 2 Russian infantrymen dressed in anti-thermal cloaks moving along tree lines and ruins. Their goal was to reach a certain point, hide there, and wait for reinforcements. However, the invaders were spotted by Spalak drone operators and eliminated with the help of a mechanized battalion. And in the past 24 hours alone, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 940 Russian occupiers. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, since the start of the full-scale invasion, the enemy army has lost more than 1,070,000 soldiers. Also, the day before, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 2 tanks, 5 armored fighting vehicles, 43 artillery systems, and 1 multiple launch rocket system.
We're going to talk about the situation on the front lines with our guest. Ira Romanenko, founder of the charitable foundation Let's Close the Sky of Ukraine, and a lieutenant general. Well, I'd like to clarify something with you. Just before you joined us, we shared comments from the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Alexander Syrsky. And I'd also like to add that he pointed out that Putin doesn't just want to buy time. He wants to seize as much, well, as many centimeters of Ukrainian territory as possible. And that's exactly why he needs more time. But what else did he mention? The pace of the enemy's advance has slowed down significantly, while their losses are very high. Nevertheless, the Russians are stubbornly trying to achieve the goals they've set for themselves. And regarding these goals, they've changed somewhat, but in the Pokrovsk direction, they've remained the same. The Russian occupiers are regrouping and focusing their efforts in this direction, as well as in the Zaporozhye area. The first remains decisive for them, and in the second, Russia is planning to launch active offensive operations, Syrsky warns. What can you add regarding the enemy's capabilities and, of course, where are they regrouping their forces from and pulling them toward the Zaporozhye direction? And what can be said about Pokrovsk as of today?
Capabilities are determined by the formation of reserves. And over the past week, despite reports that somewhere deep inside Russia several divisions are being formed, up to 12, and 2 divisions have already been formed. Maybe they will deploy some of them somewhere in the near future, and the rest, if this process continues. But one way or another, they are deploying them in directions that are a priority for them, which you've already mentioned, Pokrovsk recently, and Zaporozhye, although there has also been an uptick in activity and, unfortunately, advances by the enemy in the Kupiansk direction and, for example, in the Lyman direction. And Konstantinivka is also among the priorities, meaning the enemy is engaging from 3 sides. But lately, active operations have continued, and the largest grouping has been formed around Pokrovsk and Myrnherad, in our agglomeration there. That is, from the south and southeast, there are up to 110,000, and possibly another 100,000 to the north, where there was a recent raid. But it's not just about Pokrovsk itself. An axis of operations is forming from there toward Novopavlovsk, which is in the direction of Dnipropetrovsk region. For them, this is relevant both militarily and politically. Let's say they could add a new region. And also toward Konstantinivka, which we've already mentioned. So from Myrnherad, that is, from Pokrovsk, along the road to Kostiantynivka, coming from the Donetsk side and from the Chasiv Yar side, which they can't capture, so they're trying to bypass them. So, getting back to the priorities. The largest number, about 1/3 of all assaults in a day, are happening specifically in the Pokrovsk direction. This area is crucial for them, and here they're using 2 tactics. These are old, tried and true tactics, and where they have a certain amount of experience. Obviously, from a military standpoint, it's about cutting off our supply routes. And that was, among other things, the goal of this raid toward Dobrapilya. So, a 15-kilometer stretch, give or take, on one side, and in general, in the northeast, they're cutting off those very supply routes to Pokrovsk and Myrnherad, and on the other side, from the southwest, they attack the city directly. And not just with sabotage and reconnaissance groups anymore, but also with small assault tactical groups. They enter the city, and there is ongoing fighting to eliminate these groups. So we can see the kind of semi-encirclement Pokrovsk is in. This is an agglomeration together with Myrnherad, and here, intense fighting continues. But in Zaporozhye, since 4 regions are included in the so-called illegal changes to their constitution, up to 30,000 troops have been redeployed there over the past week. They were pulled from Sumy region and several others. Half of them are to strengthen their capabilities and offensive potential. Again, that's aimed at Pokrovsk. The other half is for Zaporizhia. And before that, Zaporizhia's resources were there. They are actively operating in the directions of Huliopol, Orikhiv, and lately, Kamiansk. That's to the west, so to speak, these are the lines of contact, the areas of fighting in Zaporizhia, with their sabotage groups even reaching as far as Stepnohursk. It's 25 kilometers from Stepnohursk to Zaporizhia. That's the access point to the road. Our forces drove them out of Stepnohursk, but the enemy still has these kinds of plans, and here, well, they're planning to use these resources in that way.
Probably, the following fact shows just how much, let's say, things are going according to plan. Like they say in Russia, everything is going as planned for the enemy's army. The fact is, the Russians are filming staged videos about supposedly capturing Ukrainian settlements, just to create some kind of illusion of success on the front. This is being reported by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Specifically, Kremlin military commanders send small groups, give them Russian flags, and direct them to bypass the positions of Ukrainian defenders. Some of these groups manage to slip into certain settlements, shoot short videos there, and then present these videos as supposed proof of capturing territory. These kinds of videos are used, among other things, for reporting to leadership and spreading in the media to put pressure on Ukrainian society. For example, just recently, the Russians circulated one of these videos from the village of Andrivka Klavtsova. How common is this kind of pressure, let's say, in military affairs? Is it often used, or is it more of a typical tactic for the Russians now, a tactic of deception? And I noticed that it's not just for propagandists, but also for reporting purposes. Why would they want to create the illusion of some kind of success for their own military? Do even their commanders not understand what's really going on?
The informational component of a large-scale war has been, is, and remains a very important part of waging such a war. And that's precisely why. Because they perceive this activity in that particular way, the Russians consistently invest a significant amount of money into the very same propaganda you mentioned, which greatly exaggerates their achievements and clearly shows things that aren't truly real, often using carefully staged actions and fabricated scenarios. Break time equals 0.5s / right? And especially recently, they tried to put on a show ahead of the meeting in Alaska to demonstrate something. And there, Putin was telling Trump about their achievements and prospects, and that things are going very badly for Ukraine on the front lines. So they should just surrender unconditionally, give up the obvious regions, and everything else. So, in other words, it was a case of striking while the iron is hot, and they tried to do this, including that Dobropilia raid, which was also timed to coincide with these circumstances. Well, as we know, the appropriate decisions were made. A corps was established. This is a new structure, more effective than the first Azov one. And they have already, so to speak, started working to stabilize the situation. And if you look at the map, there's that well-known perception, the rabbit with ears. Well, its ears have already been cut off there. And overall, if we're talking about the essence of this raid and deployment, and the overall threat from this raid, I think it's been neutralized, and further work is ongoing. The enemy still has a lot of troops, weapons, and equipment, as has already been mentioned, and that's why it's very difficult even for Azov. This is one of our best units. It used to be a brigade, and now it's a corps. And it was formed under very difficult wartime conditions. But they did their job professionally.
Ira Alexandrovich, I can't help but ask about the Ukrainian innovation. Previously, there hadn't been any mention of this missile, with a range of 3,000 kilometers. It's just that both the president of Ukraine and the previous defense minister, Reznikov, had stated that Ukraine was preparing to produce long-range weapons. And now the name Flamingo has come up with a flight range of 3,000 kilometers. This new development has a warhead twice as large as that of the American Tomahawk missiles. This was reported by Defense Express, and Ukrainian photojournalist Yefrem Lukavsky posted a photo of the new missile on social media, taken for the Associated Press agency. In other words, this is being shared with the whole world. And experts have noted that there are very few such missiles in the world, if any at all. The missile's maximum speed is reportedly 950 kilometers per hour, with a flight time of over 4 hours. The warhead weighs 1 ton. So, what can you add to that? Well, this is serial production, so how soon can they actually be used? And why is this being reported now instead of after they've already been used, for example?
Well, first of all, there are basically 2 types of these Flamingo missiles. Before this, there was the FP5, and earlier this year, I think at the beginning of the year, they were shown at an exhibition. They've already been displayed. Well, it was a prototype, or a sketch, or something like that. They showed it in that form. They talked about a few of its characteristics, but the speed you mentioned is subsonic, so it would take a long time to fly 3,000 kilometers, like a whole 4 hours. And here, we'd be better off with a ballistic missile that could achieve results quickly, but for now, with the SAP-SAN, so to speak, the discussion is ongoing, and tests have been conducted up to 500 kilometers, with strikes carried out on targets up to 300 kilometers away. But here, this Flamingo, or whatever you want to call it, is comparatively cheaper. You mentioned the main characteristics, and it's important that the warhead is very powerful, 1 ton, so it can seriously hit various types of enemy targets. And the range is really impressive. But the thing is, considering its relatively low speed, it could be vulnerable to the enemy's missile defense systems. And so, first of all, it's not clear how these types of missiles are supposed to overcome such missile defense systems. No matter what characteristics they have, definitely the ones we need. With that kind of warhead and range, it's important that there are enough of them, at least several dozen, to impact even a single target. Only then can it be done effectively. And there are such targets. For example, we definitely need to strike and impact the factories that produce drones in Tatarstan, like in Yelabuga, for instance. And there are several. Our intelligence is analyzing them. So there are such targets. We know about them, including their coordinates. The question here is that the defense forces of Ukraine need to have the tools that would allow us to do this. That is, to strike these targets. And I think that now they've already shown, so to speak, more about these missiles or this latest Flamingo missile, which could, well, significantly, having such capabilities, carry out this kind of strike. This is important, necessary, and the question is about scaling up to the dozens that are needed. And according to preliminary Western estimates, we can produce, once we pick up momentum, our defense industry enterprises, up to 50 such missiles per month. So,
That's the situation. Igor Alexandrovich, I just have a quick clarification. You raised a question about the speed of this missile, but Ukrainian drones actually have a lower speed, and yet the enemy's air defense still can't manage to deal with them. About 700 kilometers per hour on average for strike drones, right? So, let's probably not get our hopes up that missiles will be let through in the same way.
yes, the thing is, we've already set up drone production, and there's serious scaling going on. The president is setting even bigger goals and is trying, so to speak, to reach those targets. So, well, as for drones, I should probably say, these are open data, that it's considered a good result of 30 to 40% reach and hit their targets. 40% is a very good rate for reaching targets. Everything else either gets destroyed by the enemy's air or missile defense, or, well, fails to complete its mission. You see what I mean?
Now it's clear, so it still depends on the quantity.
Of what was heard, quantity and quality together.
Yes, thank you very much. Igor Alexandrovich, for always finding time for us and explaining such rather complicated things. Igor Armenenko, founder of the charity foundation Close the Sky for Me, Ukraine, Lieutenant General.